Peace profound, everybody, and welcome to my channel today. It is an honor to be here to discuss these topics with all of you, and the discussions that happen afterwards have been amazing. I am the Desert Viking, and when last we met, we talked a little bit about the Qabalah, which is the image here on screen right, the Tree of Life. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Kabbalistic worlds that exist. Then I realized before we could do that, we need to talk a little bit about what the elements represent themselves. And so, bearing that in mind, we are now going to delve into elementalism and what that means and how that relates to the Qabalah. I'll see you soon. So with the Qabalah, the Qabalah itself, the Tree of Life, as we talked about in the last video, resides in actually 5 different worlds. And underneath those 5 worlds is our world. And our world is called Asiya Gashmi, the material plane. And below the material plane, we have the Tree of Death, which is a mirror of the Tree of Life above. Now, each of those worlds is represented by one of the 4 primal elements of the material plane. The 5th element, which is not on that image, is Adam Kadmon, which is the spiritual realm. And so, as I was thinking about setting up a discussion on the 4 different worlds, it occurred to me that it might be useful to step back for a moment and examine elementalism itself and how that fits into the Qabalah and just everything in general. Now, one thing to know about me and where I'm coming from with this is not essentially a Masonic lecture or Freemasonic anything. This is dealing strictly with the elements. And so I was about 14, 15 years old. I was initiated into Druidism. I grew up in a very forested area up in the Great Lakes area, and I spent a lot of time in the woods and the forest, and that was kind of my calling. And from there, in Druidism, I was instructed the elements, what makes up the elements, from the lower, whatever you want to call it, low magic, high magic perspective. Low magic is more of the nature elements and whatnot. And ceremonial magic or high magic or theurgy is the upper portion, and which is solely based on attempting to reach a point where you reconnect with the grand architect, God, whatever you want to call him. And so I had a good, strong foundation in elements there. While I was in Korea, I was 18, 19 years old. There was a mountain next to base, which had a Buddhist temple on top of it. And I went there, and shortly after there, which was an amazing experience, I discovered, they have a lot of pawn shops and stuff outside of base, or they did back when I was in, this is the mid-1990s, so before the internet really, for most of us. I found a book on the Golden Dawn. And it was from that captured my imagination. Ceremonial magic or theurgy captured my imagination. And I would end up being self-initiated in the Golden Dawn, because where we were, there was no Golden Dawn around. There were no people around that really got into that kind of thing. And one of the aspects of the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, let me be very clear which I'm talking about. As I understand it, there's another order of the Golden Dawn, which is other things that I'm not talking about. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn kind of infused Freemasonry with Rosicrucianism with other elements and kind of combined them. And the Golden Dawn is considered one of the last original esoteric schools. People may want to fight about that. That's just in general. That was the last big one. And there's been a lot of offshoots since then. But in their degree work, when you first start, you essentially learn the Hebrew alphabet You learn the astrological signs and the signs of the planet, like what they look like. And you learn some other things. You learn the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Now, the image I currently have up right there is a pentagram. And this pentagram, I believe, is from Agrippa's work. And Agrippa was a Middle Ages occultist, basically, who set a lot of the foundations for the spiritual movement of the late 1700s through the early 1900s. So a lot of work was based off of his foundation. And we're not really going to get too deep into the history, though that actually would probably be a really cool lecture to talk into the history of the books and the order, who built off of who. But anyhow, after you mastered the neophyte phase, you would move into like the first degree, the second degree, etc. And they focused on elements. And the first one was the earth element, which is where pentacles come. If you study lower magic, pentacles are a common tool that you'll see, and they represent the earth. Well, pentagrams represent all 5 elements. They represent the human in its entirety. The pentagram is a piece of sacred geometry that is very often used. In fact, so in the Golden Dawn, when you learn the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, that's an earth pentagram that you're working with, which is more of a defensive banishment type pentagram, depending on how you draw it. It's been around for a very long time. Sacred geometry has existed long before organized religion, and it can be found in carvings and hieroglyphs and other writings that date to the beginning of our current epoch since the flood. So the people, when they see the pentagram, they get this notion that it's the devil or whatever, which is absurd. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, it represents a person. We're going to actually see how it ties into some Jewish mysticism here in a moment. When we want to take a step back to elementalism. And in my current path, what I'm doing is I am, since the solstice, tracing through the elements. So I'm on earth element right now, kind of going back to roots. I'm a Taurus. And it also happens to be the first degree of the Golden Dawn. So I'm kind of redoing all of those things just to brush up on it because it's been a little while. And we're going to talk about the elements and kind of what those infer. But I want to talk about some of the symbology first. And it's important to understand how the elements work, because when you break down the Qabalah into its various, the worlds, which represent various elements, understanding what each element represents is an important part of esoteric knowledge. And it applies to so many different traditions. So again, pentagram here represents all 5 of the elements. So when you look at a pentagram, a 5-pointed star, and you break it down, we see the corresponding elements that reside there. So the spirit sits at our crown, the top, and in the Qabalah, that's Kether. When you draw to screen right, we have water and fire, and then screen left, air and earth. The downwards triangles, water and earth, represent female elements, whereas the upright triangles, air and fire, represent masculine elements. And they all come together to form the entire piece of geometry. Both masculine and feminine are vital to creating the correct geometry, and geometry is a very, very important piece of knowledge. If you're Freemason, of course, it's one of the central tenets is geometry, but the 7 liberal arts themselves are based around a lot of what we're going to be talking about here. And the 7 liberal arts don't mean like today what you'd think about when we say liberal arts. The seven liberal arts are the foundation stones upon which civilization has been created. And most of these, not all, but most, have been removed entirely from the public education system. And I believe that could be intentional, because not only does it dumb people down, it makes them very compliant and dependent on other people. And the 7 liberal arts, and this is not a lecture on those, but I'm going to list them for you because if you are watching this, I would highly recommend, Freemason or not, that you look into these. And you're going to recognize all 7 of them. But look into these and how you can brush up on these yourself. The first three of the 7 liberal arts was known as the trivium, and that was grammar, rhetoric, and logic. The very foundation pieces upon which any person can expect to build a rational discourse with others. The ability to write correctly, the ability to argue effectively, to be able to present an argument correctly, and the ability to parse the information you receive rationally and logically to draw your own conclusions, which is a huge part of esotericism in and of itself, because we cannot spoon feed you. I cannot be spoon fed. No one can be spoon fed. You have to be able to parse through this information on your own. So that's the trivium. The last 4 liberal arts are arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. Now, together, those form the 7 liberal arts from which civilization is built upon. And if you have a strong knowledge of those 7 areas, you are able to rebuild society, civilization, should it collapse. And that is something that the Freemasons are custodians of that knowledge. But this is not something that's a secret. Anyone out there can know those. Now, moving on. We're not here to talk about the 7 liberal arts. We're here to talk about elements and what they represent. When we want to know where those triangles came from, so you see we have you'll see the different triangles. So just remember, downward means feminine, upward means masculine. Where do those lines come from? Well, these are derivatives of the hexagram, which is presented here. The hexagram is the 6-pointed star. You might know it as the Star of David, but the hexagram has existed long before Judaism took that upon themselves as their symbol. And as you can see, the 6-pointed star is nothing more than 2 triangles put together to form a 6-pointed star. And if you pull the triangles that correspond to the elements out, you'll see some of them have lines and some of them don't. So that is where the triangles came from, which is always neat I like to know a little bit about the history. Now, Qabalah is all about, it's an interface with God, with the archangels, with the angelic choirs, and so forth. It is, per legend, was given to Moses as a way to instruct the people how to commune with the spiritual realm at its very basic, and to ascend the tree of life to reach our ultimate ending, which is to reform with the divine source from whence we came, taking with us the collective experiences that we will have manifested and lived throughout our various lives that we have lived. Okay? Now, understanding the Hebrew alphabet is important if you're doing any of this work with the Qabalah, because the Hebrew alphabet you're going to find is a central piece. It's everywhere. And they say the Hebrew alphabet, legend has it, that the Hebrew alphabet is what God used to create the world. Now, what you're looking at on screen here is what we call the Tetragrammaton. This was the hidden name of God. 4 characters. Yod-He, Vod-He. Now, Yod-He, Vod-He is one of the names of God, is the Tetragrammaton, the hidden name of God. It's not so hidden today. Each of those characters is packed with a bunch of meaning. I've been posting on the hidden meaning of the Hebrew letters, or what they mean, and the numbers and everything that they represent in posts on the channel. So you can go back and look through where we're at on those. But this word, Yod-He, Vod-He, represents the 4 elements. Now, Hebrew is read from right to left. So Yod is the character on the far right. He is represented twice, is the 2nd and the 4th character. And Vod is the 3rd character, as again from the right. And this is where things will get fun a little bit. We're going to talk about each of these, those represent an element. Now, let's throw in another curveball to discuss. If you manage to, and I'm trying to find my image, so I apologize. There he is. All right. So there's the other image. That is the tetragrammaton with an extra letter added in the middle. That is Shin. The central character with the three prongs. That is a symbol of fire. It's one of the mother letters of the Hebrew alphabet. There's three mother characters. That's one of them. And that changes this word to mean Yeshua, which you might know as Jesus. So the name Jesus is an intentional, that word that we use, Yeshua, is intentional. It is the name of God with an extra character. And that intermediate character represents the fifth element, which is spirit. So when you combine, when you form Yeshua, that character means spirit, ascending spirit. Now, again, as I said, each of these characters represents a different element. So what you're seeing now is a pentacle representing the tetragrammaton and the different elements. Something to be aware of. So the order of the elements on the tetragrammaton is, so if we go back to the image of the characters there, the far right yod represents fire. It kind of even looks like a little flame if you look at it. The first he is water. The vod, the third character, is air. And the last he is earth, which means that the two h's, the two hes, represent female, and the other two characters represent masculine. Now I'm going to caveat this because this will get confusing for you when you go do research on this on your own. You will often see, as it pertains to the Qabalah, the second character, which represents the word Bria, or the realm of Bria, I should say, they'll say that is not water, that is air. So it goes from fire, air, water, earth. Whereas I just said it was fire, water, air, earth. You will encounter this. Now, what's going on? One of the things if you're just starting this path, that you'll notice, and for those of you who have been walking it for a while already know, because I guarantee you've encountered this, you're going to get different interpretations and you're going to get different versions of things. Part of that is intentional. When authors wrote books on these subjects, they purposely obfuscate the books. So you're going to get partial truths, and then a lot of that's going to be intentionally misleading. And they do that to keep the knowledge sacred and with a very limited number of people. The second reason you're going to see that is simply someone copied off someone else, and it just flows through like the phone game. Just carries through. Now, why, in this case, we actually have a reason why there's two versions of that in particular. And that is because Qabalah with a K represents Jewish mysticism, and Qabalah with a Q beginning it is essentially the Golden Dawn's version of the Qabalah. And the Golden Dawn swapped those out. Which one's correct? I can't answer that question for you. And in fact, I've done in researching that question, you're going to get, most people are rational and will be like, well, the Golden Dawn changed this, but people will fight about which one's right, and no human knows, I would guarantee. Or if they do, they're the people in the shadows that don't say anything. And it could be that both are correct or both are wrong. Who knows? I follow the Golden Dawn, so I follow the Qabalah with a Q. It's the one that resonates more with me. And a lot of the ritual work that they have presented to the public, when they went public, well, actually when Aleister Crowley published a bunch of things he shouldn't have, and then Israel Regardie basically he made it public, was to correct the intentionally misleading pieces. And this caused an uproar back in the early 20th century when those individuals did these things. There was a lot of bad blood that they generated with the esoteric circles because they were revealing truths which were normally obfuscated. So I have a feeling in my heart, and I could be wrong. Remember, my trademark statement, I'm not a guru. I'm learning just like you are. But my feeling is that the Golden Dawn material was closer to the source, as it were, than what you would read elsewhere, because the initial publications were supposed to be more of the truth. That was the intention. Does that mean it is all the truth? I can't answer that. Does that mean that Israel Regardie and Crowley didn't obfuscate some things? Well, Crowley obfuscates through his own, by the way he writes. When you read his later writings, you really have to have a nice quiet spot to think about what you're reading, because he is very dense, and intentionally so. Those words that he uses are not meant for a casual listener. Israel Regardie is a lot easier to read, but did he mislead? I don't know. Dion Fortune in her books talks about misleading as well. She tries to be as truthful, I feel, but she also will say in her books, I'm not going to talk about this any longer because it's not appropriate, because we're not supposed to reveal these things. Okay. Big history on Hebrews, the language, the tetragrammaton, the placement of the elements. When you're looking at the letters in the Golden Dawn system, each of those letters represents a certain aspect or study of esotericism. So fire begins us off. Fire represents invocations and evocations. Next to fire, we had water, which represents healing and charms and things of that nature. Next to that, we had air, which is where our divination comes from. And last, we had earth, which is where your alchemy comes from. And all of those form together to create the tetragrammaton. Now, understanding the elements is important, because if you're dealing with the realm of fire at Zulith, that is the world of emanation. That's where the divine source is first coming down upon. Understanding what fire represents is useful. Understanding what the water element represents is useful. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk a little about here. Before we talk about those worlds and what those mean, let's talk a little bit about the elements. Let's take a step back to the lower magic realms and lower esotericism. Just talk about the nature works. So I like to start with Earth, and the Golden Dawn starts with Earth. Earth is all around us. It's what we're made out of. It's the physical substance of things. It's your finances. It's your house. It's your comfort. I'm a Taurus, which is the prime Earth zodiac sign. So, and I can attest to that. I am pretty much entirely everything a Taurus is, even before I knew what that was. And once I learned, it was kind of neat how that resonated with me. And to get more in touch with Earth, you go out, you touch the ground, you touch grass, right? Put your hands on the ground, and you can feel it. If you walk around and you pay attention to the trees, and you pay attention to the plants, and you pay attention to the rocks, all of those things have a vibration about them. All of those things are creations of God. All of those things have a form of life about them. Crystals have they have what they call a sheath around them. They're obviously not alive, but they have vibrations, and we know they have vibrations because we use them in our technology to generate electricity. Because when you put pressure on certain crystals, it exerts an electrical discharge. So there is power within rocks and earth. Earth is also about geomancy, which is basically a divination school using earthing rods and things of that nature. Earth is herbalism, understanding the plants, understanding how they can help or hurt you. So there's a lot. Earth is protection. Earth is grounding. The earth is what we're made out of. Like any element, you want to not have too much or too little of each one. That's the balancing act that we live in every day. Or at least that's the balancing act I live in. And the Qabalah teaches me that with the two opposite pillars, I walk the middle. They call that the gray path. That's one of the words for it. It essentially means I recognize the need for both light and dark in my life, and the elements are the same. You need all four elements in your life, and you need to try to keep them in equilibrium as much as possible. Too little earth leads you to being ungrounded, and your head's in the clouds all the time, right? And too much earth makes you over-practical and slovenly and slothful and lazy and indulgent. So you have to work with that element inside of you. And esotericism is all about that. It's all about thinking, right? Relating everything in your life. You can relate everything in your life to an element and go, when you make your choices, is this going to lead me to more equilibrium, or is this going to lead me to a more extreme example? Where am I coming from in this? The other feminine element is water. And water is representative of the astral plane, the astral sea. Water is about your emotions. It's represented on a table by a grail or a cup. It is where our emotional stability resides. It's also where often healing powers come from. It's the water element. Too much water, you're over-emotional. You're not able to think rationally. You just think with your emotions. Too little emotions, well, now you're more robotic and without feeling, which is not a place where we want to be. Coming over to the masculine side, we have the air element. The air element is my personal second affinity. My totems are the crow and the wolf, and I'm born under the bull. But the crow, or the air, the raven, represents sharpness of mind. And that's where your divination comes from. It's where your intellect is housed. Wind is the air we breathe. It is vital. As you breathe in and out, you can feel the air all around you circulating through your body. And it is also a tempest and a storm. If you put too much emphasis in air, your head stays in the clouds. Again, you need to be earthed. You need to be grounded. And so that's the air element. And then last we have the fire element. And the fire element is a masculine element. And the fire element represents passion and action and courage. And it has all those great qualities. And too much fire, well, that leads to rash decisions, impulsiveness, and things of that nature. Fire is both, reminds us of its benevolence. It keeps us warm. The sun allows life to exist. But fire can also burn your house down and kill you and burn you. So we want to keep all of those elements in check. And understanding those four elements, and that was the quick 10-minute overview of them all. And there are books dedicated to each subject, and I highly recommend, if you're on this path, that you begin to look. And I'll just give you a pointer. This is my path. You do whatever you want. You do you, as they say. I'm starting with Earth because the Earth is where, what we're made out of and what we're around. It's also, as happens to be, I'm a Taurus, so I have a very strong affinity towards Earth. So just kind of immerse yourself in the elements, and those come together to form spirit, which is the last of the elements. And kind of, it's Kether. It sits above your crown, above your head. And all of those make us who we are. And as we showed Agrippa's picture, which I'll close with, the pentacle, the five-sided piece of sacred geometry, represents the human form. And in some work that you may do, we assume the form of the pentacle or pentagram quite often. There's nothing evil about the symbol. There's definitely nothing evil about the elements and attuning ourselves to them, because the elements were created by God. And part of our path here is to master those elements, because you are composed of them all as well. As within, so without, as they say. So being able to master what's inside helps you master what's without. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I appreciate you greatly. I appreciate the conversations that we've been having. The last thing I will mention which is not anything to do with the Builder's Workshop here, and I'll leave a link below, is the Masonic research group that I am a part of. We have published our website, and our first article has been put up. So we have a Discord link on there as well. I will leave all of that stuff in the description of the video. But the website is thetreeofthedesertvalley.org, and I know that's a mouthful, so I'm going to make sure that the link is there for you to check out. And this is a site, this is a group open to anyone if you're interested, male or female. It's not a Masonic group per se. We do research Freemasonry. So there are some restricted articles that we plan on doing that you have to be a Master Mason to have access towards. But we encourage everybody who wants to be a part of researching esoteric or non-esoteric. If it deals with the light, we want to hear from you. And our seekers are writing for us. Our Masons are writing for us. I'm as far, again, this is not a Masonic body per se. It is a research group. So again, while some topics may be kept private because they have to be due to obligations and whatnot, many of the things that we go over are public knowledge and whatnot, and is there for the general education of the public. Because I feel that this work that we do here is so very important, especially today, where it seems like everywhere you turn, it's just dark, and we need some more light. So we want to be a part of that. Thank you again for tuning in. Until next time we will be discussing the four worlds of the Qabalah, and then we will start getting into the spheres and the paths. So there's a whole lot more to go over. So stick around.